Most people think the dangerous part of buying a house is getting rejected by the bank. It's not. The dangerous part is getting approved. Because banks are not calculating whether you'll build wealth. They're calculating whether you can survive the payment long enough for them to profit from the loan. That's a completely different question. And in 2026, that difference matters more than most people realize. Because home prices stayed high. Mortgage rates doubled compared to just a few years ago. Property taxes climbed. Insurance costs exploded in some states. And yet, millions of buyers are still using affordability rules that were built for a completely different economy. So today, we're going to run the real numbers. Not fantasy math, not realtor math, not TikTok math. Real monthly cash flow math. We'll break down exactly how much house someone earning $60,000 can realistically afford. What changes at $100,000? What happens at $175,000? And the hidden costs almost nobody includes before signing a mortgage. Because the number that matters most isn't what house can the bank approve. It's what's left after the house. That's the number that quietly determines whether you build wealth, whether you stay financially stressed, and whether your house becomes an asset or a monthly financial hostage situation. Let's start with the system itself. Most banks use something called the debt-to-income ratio, DTI. The idea is simple. Your lender compares your monthly income against your monthly debt obligations, and then decides whether you qualify. The most common version is the 28-36 rule, meaning no more than 28% of your gross monthly income should go toward housing, and no more than 36% should go toward total debt. Sounds reasonable, but there's a problem. The bank uses your gross income, not your take-home pay. That means they calculate affordability using money you never actually get to keep. Taxes, health insurance, retirement deductions, gone. The bank doesn't care because technically the payment still clears. That's the first trap. The second trap is that most buyers dramatically underestimate the real cost of ownership because your mortgage payment is not your housing cost. It's just the beginning. You also have property taxes, homeowner's insurance, PMI, maintenance, utilities, repairs, furnishing, HOA fees in many neighborhoods, and opportunity cost. The house payment is the visible expense. The hidden expenses are what slowly crush cash flow. Let's start with Ryan. Ryan earns $60,000 per year. After taxes, his take-home pay is roughly $3,900 per month, depending on state taxes and deductions. Ryan has a modest car payment, small student loans, and decent credit. Nothing extreme. Under the traditional 28-36 rule, Ryan's maximum recommended housing payment sits around $1,400 per month. Now, here's where reality hits. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate in 2026 is hovering around 6.4%. At today's rates, with 10% down, Ryan's affordability range lands around $200,000 to $220,000. The national median home price right now is just above $400,000. So Ryan is already priced out of the average American home. That's before bidding wars, before closing costs, before repairs. So Ryan does what many buyers do. He stretches. He buys a modest $265,000 house. Not luxury, not flashy, just normal. His down payment is 10%. That means his loan amount becomes roughly $238,000. At 6.4%, his monthly principal and interest payment is about $1,490. Now, let's add reality. Property taxes, roughly $240 monthly. Insurance, another $130. PMI, because he didn't put 20% down, around $165 monthly. Now, his real housing payment becomes roughly $2,025 every month. That's over 50% of his take-home income before groceries, gas, utilities, healthcare, internet, car maintenance, emergencies, or retirement investing. And this is where people emotionally misunderstand affordability. Because Ryan technically owns a house, but financially, Ryan has almost no margin left. The leftover number matters more than the approval number. After housing, Ryan has less than $1,900 remaining for his entire life. And that's before maintenance. Remember, houses break constantly. The water heater fails, the roof leaks, the dishwasher dies, the HVAC system quits during the hottest week of summer. A common estimate is to budget 1% of the home's value every year for maintenance. On Ryan's house, that's another $2,600 annually, about $215 monthly. The bank never included that. And this is where homeownership becomes dangerous for lower-income buyers in 2026. Not because buying is bad, but because modern ownership leaves almost no room for error. One job loss, one medical bill, one major repair, and suddenly the house becomes a source of financial panic instead of stability. Now let's move to Maya. Maya earns $100,000 per year. On paper, she looks financially comfortable. After taxes, her monthly take-home is roughly $6,300. No major debt, good credit, stable job. Her lender loves her. Using traditional affordability rules, Maya qualifies for roughly $375,000 to $425,000, depending on the lender. But her bank approves her for nearly $500,000 because approval and sustainability are not the same thing. Maya decides to be responsible. She buys a $400,000 home with 20% down. That's an $80,000 down payment. Her mortgage balance becomes $320,000. At 6.4%, principal and interest land around $2,000 monthly. Add taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance reserves, and Maya's real monthly housing cost becomes roughly $2,750 to $2,950 monthly. Nearly half her take-home income once all ownership costs are included. Now, here's the important part. Maya is not broke. She can absolutely make the payment. That's what traps people psychologically. Because financial stress doesn't always look like disaster. Sometimes it looks like stalled investing, delayed retirement, constant budgeting, avoiding vacations, carrying low-level anxiety, and never fully rebuilding savings after buying. Maya's leftover number after housing, transportation, food, insurance, utilities, subscriptions, and normal life expenses is probably around $1,000 to $1,500 monthly. That sounds decent. Until life happens. 6 months after moving in, the HVAC system fails. Repair cost? $9,000. Maya doesn't have enough liquid cash because most of her savings went into the down payment, closing costs, moving expenses, furniture, appliances, blinds, and basic home setup. That's another hidden cost nobody talks about enough. Furniture shock. People buy the house, then realize they still need couches, tables, lawn equipment, tools, washers, dryers, curtains, shelves, storage, lighting. Owning the home is expensive. Making the home livable is another layer entirely. So Maya puts the repair on a credit card. And suddenly, the financially responsible homeowner starts carrying high-interest debt. not because she was irresponsible, because the margin was thinner than it looked. That's what the bank never explains. Now, let's look at Derek. Derek earns $175,000 annually. He's financially disciplined, maxes retirement accounts, no major debt. This is the type of buyer most people imagine when they think comfortable homeowner. Under traditional affordability guidelines, Derek can reasonably afford $600,000 to $700,000, depending on taxes and rates. And technically, that's true. But here's where geography changes everything. Derek lives in Denver, or Austin, or Nashville, or Seattle suburbs, places that were once considered affordable. Now, the median home price often sits between $550,000 and $750,000. So Derek buys a $575,000 home. He puts 20% down. That's $115,000 immediately tied into the house. His mortgage becomes roughly $460,000. At 6.4%, his principal and interest payment lands around $2,875 monthly. Add taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, and his realistic monthly ownership cost becomes roughly $3,800 to $4,200 monthly. Now, unlike Ryan, Derek can still breathe financially. His leftover number remains healthy. But this is where opportunity cost becomes important. That $115,000 down payment invested at a 7% annual return becomes over $225,000 in 10 years. That doesn't mean buying was wrong. It means the real cost of ownership is larger than most buyers calculate. And honestly, this is the biggest mistake people make when buying homes. They only calculate, can I make the payment? Instead of, what does this payment prevent me from doing? That's the real affordability question. Because housing costs affect retirement speed, investment growth, career flexibility, stress levels, emergency resilience, and lifestyle freedom. A larger house payment often quietly reduces investing, risk-taking, entrepreneurship, travel, flexibility, and future options. And that trade-off compounds for decades. Now, let's talk about something almost nobody discusses honestly: lifestyle compression. This is what happens after someone buys the maximum house they can technically afford. From the outside, they look successful, but internally, their financial life shrinks. The vacations slow down, investing slows down, emergency savings disappear. Every repair becomes emotionally stressful. And this is why so many homeowners quietly feel trapped despite owning expensive homes. The payment consumed the future margin that was supposed to build wealth. This is especially dangerous in 2026 because mortgage rates changed the math dramatically. At 3% mortgage rates, stretching was dangerous but survivable for many households. At 6.4%, interest alone becomes enormous. On a $400,000 mortgage at 6.4% over 30 years, you pay over $500,000 in interest alone, more than the original loan amount. That's not a small detail. That's a second house purchased entirely for the bank. And again, that doesn't mean home ownership is bad, but it means buyers need to stop thinking emotionally and start calculating realistically. So, what house can you actually afford in 2026? The honest answer is probably less than the bank says, because the bank is calculating payment survivability. You should be calculating wealth survivability. That's different. Here's a much better framework. After mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, and realistic living costs, you should still have 15 to 20% of your take-home income available for retirement investing, emergency savings, and future wealth building. That's your leftover number. If the house destroys that number, the house is probably too expensive. even if the bank says yes. And maybe that's the strangest thing about modern homeownership. Most people think buying the house is the finish line. In reality, it's the beginning of a 30-year cash flow commitment that shapes almost every major financial decision afterward. Your house payment influences how aggressively you can invest, how much stress you carry, how quickly you can retire, how much risk you can take, and how financially resilient you become during hard times. The bank only checks whether the payment clears. You're the one who has to build an entire life around what's left afterward. And in 2026, that leftover number matters more than ever.